Well, this class is going to be about Reconstruction. If you watch the first class about the pre-Civil War, and then you watched about the Civil War, you probably can understand very quickly that there was quite a bit of resentment. There was hatred between the Northerners and the Southerners, particularly in the part of the Southerners, because they lost, and they weren't good losers about it. They're still not good losers about it. But the story goes like this. After the Battle of Antietam, Abraham Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation. And on January 1st, 1863, all slaves shall be thenceforward, and forever free. But it didn't change anyone's attitude about racism. White people still looked at black people as slightly above savages, to be honest about it. And their best abilities were at manual labor, not at any other kind of job, whether manual labor in the fields or manual labor in the houses as maids and servants. What was the status of the defeated South? Well, several different people had different ideas about it, and you could say that if Abraham Lincoln had lived, it would have been a different Reconstruction, but when you read more into it, I'm not really sure that that's true. Even Abraham Lincoln could not have changed the attitudes of the Southerners who had lived for decades and decades and decades of owning slaves. And the economy was based on owning slaves, and slaves were property to be bought and sold. And then there's a question about what freedom means for ex-slaves. When you get to the end of the chapter, you can see that I don't remember whose opinion it was, but someone said, just turning people free with no, okay, you're free, goodbye. You have no place to live, you have no way to earn a living, you don't own any land, you don't own anything. You own maybe the clothes on your back, because nobody wants it back. And they just threw them out there as freemen. And the Southerners would not give up the Old South. I want you to read it at the last page of that chapter. There's something about lost cause. Lincoln's plan was very generous, and all the only people that he really wanted to maybe not put on trial, but to prosecute were being the senior Confederate politicians and maybe some senior Confederate military, but everybody else at Appomattox, they can keep their horses, they can keep their sidearms, their pistols, and everybody go back home because it's April and you need to get the planting in, and everybody's got to go back to work again. The war's over. But it didn't pay any attention to the simple fact that now you've got millions of black freedmen that own nothing. And the Southerners are scared to death of them. The Southerners thought that the black people would rise up and start murdering white people. It never happened. But the fear was there. The labor system changes. It mentions in the book about sharecropping. Sharecropping could be compared to arrangements of, I would have just guessed that the Spanish, the way they treated the indigenous peoples in the highlands of Ecuador and Peru. You can live on this hacienda of tens of thousands of hectares, and you can have your little crop, but I get a piece of it. And everything I get 25, whatever the deal was, 25%, I'll provide you with the seeds and the stuff, and there's always a major portion of whatever the labor was, and then that went back to the owners of the land, and then the indigenous people in South America or Mexico, or the black people in the southern United States, they had to work a certain amount of time for whatever it was the landowner needed. And the other thing was, it was permanent debt. You had to go some places like the hacienda or the plantation or the ex-plantation had a store, and you went to the store and you got things on credit, and you owed the store. And we'll discuss this more when we get to the 1930s. I'll tell you about my mother's childhood in coal mining country in eastern Kentucky. Lincoln said, with malice toward none, charity for all, firmness in the right as God gives us to see the right. Abraham Lincoln is worth a study. An amazing person. There's a wonderful book written by Doris Goodman, and it's about Lincoln's compassion for human beings. A proclamation of amnesty meaning that the Southerners, military, they can go home, everyone's pardoned. But Lincoln died. And then the new president was Andrew Johnson. The transition of slaves to freedmen, certainly it's very difficult. You and every ancestor and every one of your family, all of a sudden you're free. They had to enter into contracts. They had to work diligently, but they were always subordinate. Black people did not look white people in the eye. And I remember when I first moved to Ecuador, I lived in Quito, and the indigenous people living in the city, one time when I was first learning to speak Spanish, a little Indian guy says, "No sé malito, padroncito." And I'm thinking, malito. That means I'm bad. Don't be bad. I'm not bad. You didn't look up at me. And you still see people walking around with their head down and subservient is the best word for it. The quest for autonomy simply means that white Southerners' Negro freedom was anarchy, like I said before. Whites always saw blacks as lazy, irresponsible, dishonest, and basically savages. They were afraid of them. So the blacks, naturally, they had to hang out with their own kind. Black religion was a Christian religion, but with black music and black methods of worship, the black family groups, and they were totally rejected by whites. Whites did not associate with blacks unless the blacks were in a subservient position. Andrew Johnson becomes president of the United States. He was a Southerner. He really hated the upper class Southern plantation owners and the rich of the South. I think Andrew Johnson was from Tennessee. But he believed that Negroes are inferior to white men in point of intellect, basically better physically and intellectually built for labor. He was as racist. Here's the point. We call it racist today. In those days, it wasn't called racism. It was simply a reality. It was a paradigm of the black and the paradigm of the white in the southern states of the United States. Southerners rejected black freedom in many ways. They invented black codes, keep the blacks in their place. Blacks couldn't vote. Blacks, what they would do is they invented all kinds of ways of preventing black people from registering to vote. I remember reading somewhere if a black wanted to vote, he had to go register, and they would ask him to read the state constitution. Most blacks were illiterate. Before the Civil War, it was an illegal act to teach a black person to read. The whites definitely knew the danger of educating blacks, educating women too. It wasn't necessary to educate a woman. An educated woman's a dangerous thing. Look at the Taliban today. They'll kill you for trying to educate women. Constant harassment, discrimination. The 14th Amendment, the Congress of the United States. Very quickly how a law is made in the United States. There are two houses of the Congress. It's called a bicameral Congress. The lower house is the House of Representatives based on the number the population of each individual state. That's how many congressmen they have. The upper house is the U.S. Senate. There are two senators from each state. So quickly you can figure out how many senators are there in the Senate. Laws are made, including amendments to the Constitution. In the United States, we have never thrown out the Constitution and rewritten it. And it's very difficult to amend the Constitution. I think there are 28 amendments, 29 amendments to the Constitution. The first 10 were in 1789, and there's only been that many since, 18 maybe. The 14th Amendment. Well, the 13th Amendment was that all persons the 13th Amendment. No, I'm thinking of the Emancipation Proclamation. The 14th Amendment confers citizenship on all people born or naturalized in the United States, and the states cannot take away their constitutional privileges and immunities. It also forbid any state from taking a person's liberty or property without due process. Americans like to think of the United States as a country of laws. We make the laws, we obey the laws, and of course we got a lot of lawyers. So everybody wants to sue everybody else for everything. You can't deny people equal protection under the law. Well, this is kind of important because one of the ways of removing the president, we don't rise up and throw the president out, and we don't shoot him or whack him with swords and things like that. They impeach him. An impeachment of the president, Johnson was the first one to be impeached. Nixon was almost impeached, but he quit before they could do it, and Clinton was actually impeached. What happens is this. The House of Representatives, the lower house, they can bring charges against the president for violating his sworn oath to uphold the Constitution for various reasons. With Johnson, it was an argument about who he could, for an quick example, someone's going to be the Secretary of State. The President of the United States recommends someone to be the Secretary of State. That person has to go before a committee of the Congress, of the House of Representatives. They approve it, then it goes to the Senate. They approve it, the person gets the job. Well, the Congress said that the President of the United States, Johnson, could not remove any people that they approved without their approval, but he did. He kept Lincoln's main I guess you call them ministers. The Secretary of War was Stanton. In the United States, they call them secretaries, and he didn't get along with Mr. Stanton, so he removed him. The Senate, the impeachment goes to the Senate, and it was one vote short of impeaching the president. It would mean remove him from office. The 15th Amendment prohibited states from denying citizens their right to vote because the Southerners tried everything they could to block black people from voting. You can't block them based on race, color, or previous condition of servitude. Encouraged women, and immediately women said, if blacks the 15th Amendment applies to servitude, race, and color, it should also apply to women. And if you're really interested in an interesting paper, you could write a research paper about suffrage, women's suffrage. Southern politics, all Southerners opposed emancipation, particularly the planters class, the people who owned a lot of slaves previously. And when the slaves were free, obviously they lost a lot of money. They lost property. The black people belonged to them, and you could sell one for, I don't know, depends on how healthy the person was, and you lost it. And they also lost their labor. Who's going to pick the cotton? Who's going to take care of the fields? Who's going to work in the house? We have to pay everybody. Even the poor white people, they were against freedom for the blacks because then who were they going to be above? And the comment was the blacks are lazy and so on, and they have to use the whip to govern black people. That's what they thought of them. But slowly they could vote in some places. They did very slowly, but it was never accepted. And by the mid-1870s, Reconstruction was a failure. There was some industrialization, but nothing like in the North. The blacks were still excluded for everything. The myth of Negro rule, there's too many Negroes and they're getting political power, and the Southerners demanding return to or white supremacy. And they did. They did so much that there was no real civil rights movement between the 1870s and the 1950s, let's say 1950s, after the Second World War. The Ku Klux Klan, terrorists. Terrorists that specialize in killing and raping and lynching and murdering and what they call tar and feathers. If they wanted to scare somebody or they want to kill them, they would take hot tar, I think in Spanish it's brea, and take big bags of chicken feathers. They would pour the boiling tar over the person, cover them with feathers, and then hang them from the nearest tree. And then other people would be too frightened to go vote, too frightened to own land, too frightened to shop in certain places, too frightened to live there, and run them out of the area. So Reconstruction, it failed. The South's social structure didn't change anything. Distribution of wealth and power remained in the hands of the whites, particularly in what's called the Lower South, Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana. Oh, and South Carolina. I just read something a couple minutes ago on the national news. A group of black people were asked to leave a restaurant because some lady in Charleston, South Carolina, felt threatened by the small group of black people. So it goes on. It's still there. I made my class in American history here in Guayaquil the other day. I asked them to write a list of 5 most important things that we need to change, and most people said education and health, and then almost all the students said racism. It still exists here. It exists everywhere. Well, I said before too, emancipating doesn't truly free people from centuries of servitude. It failed because racism. The southern states still believed that the federal government had no right to interfere in what they called state business and matters. A fear of millions of freed slaves and the legacy of the lost cause. Please read page 454. Thank you. Until next time.